Good morning, and we're going to talk about production possibilities today. And I'm not really sure how to make this bigger right here, so you're going to have to bear with me until I get the hang of doing this a little bit better. Let's see if that's not. Oh, well, that's really too big. Okay, there we go. That makes it a little better. So, when we're talking about economics, we're talking about making choices between things. And so, we've talked about what our resources are and that we have land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And we've talked about the three different types of capital, which would be physical for our tools that we use to produce goods and services, financial, which would be the money that we invest to be able to produce goods and services. And then human capital is the education and training that our workers need to be able to produce goods and services. And so if we put those resources together, we can make some type of good or service. And I always like to use tree houses as my example because it's something really easy. So if we had a tree and we had some lumber and nails and screws and screwdrivers and hammers and ladders and trucks and lumber and all those things, we could create tree houses. And depending on how we put those things together, we could produce a certain number of tree houses. But a treehouse isn't the only thing that we could make with those materials, with those resources. We could make bird houses, or we could make dog houses, or we could make any other number of things. But if we wanted to say that our top two choices of what we could make were tree houses and dog houses, then the opportunity cost of making tree houses would be making dog houses, or the opportunity cost of making dog houses would be tree houses. And so we can use our resources in different ways to produce one or the other of those two things. And we can show it on a graph with what is called a production possibilities curve. Sometimes you'll see this called a production possibilities frontier. You'll see it written both ways. I can't tell you which one you'll see more because they're both used interchangeably. So if you see PPC for production possibilities curve or PPF for production possibilities frontier, they both mean the exact same thing. And so what a production possibilities curve does is shows the trade-off in a model, of a graph model of if a country only produces two things. So in our situation that we were talking about would be if they only are going to produce tree houses or dog houses, what's going to be the trade-off? Well, we know the more of our materials we use to produce tree houses, the less of our materials we'll be able to use to produce dog houses. Or if we use more materials to produce dog houses, we'll be able to make fewer tree houses. Most economists explain this in what we call guns or butter. Guns just means it's a military item, and butter means it's spending on a domestic item. And so this chart here shows us that we can make all guns, which would be 400 guns here at point E. If we made all guns, let me scroll up a little bit. If we made all guns, we would make 500 guns. And if all of our resources were spent on military goods, we wouldn't have anything left over to spend on domestic goods. But if we work here at point A and we spend all of our resources on domestic goods, on the butter, then we don't have any resources left over for military goods. So most economies are going to produce somewhere in between the two maximums. Now, our production possibilities, it doesn't tell us which one of these points is going to be the most productive. It just tells us we can produce at any of these points, that the more guns we have, the fewer butter we will be able to have, or the more we spend on military goods, the less we will have to spend on domestic goods. And the opposite is also true. So it doesn't say we should produce at point B. It's just saying we are effective and efficient if we produce at point B, or we should produce at point D. It's just saying any point on this line is efficient. So what this table shows us, and I have not done this correctly, this should be move from producing guns to producing butter and vice versa. It shows us um, that the more guns we have, the less butter we have. Okay. And so if we go into our chart, it shows us an increasing opportunity cost. So we should know by now that an opportunity cost is what you give up when you make a choice, the thing that you don't get the opportunity to do or have. So if we look back at our chart, you can see here that our opportunity cost of producing the first 100 guns, we're looking at how much butter we're losing. And so what you should see is that we go from 25,000 butter to 24,000 butter. So if we add 100 guns, we lose 1,000 butter. But if we add one more 100, from 100 to 200 guns, we lose 2,000 butter. And if we add one more 100 guns, we lose 4,000 butter. And if we add one more 100 guns, we lose 5,000 butter. And if we add the last 100 guns, we're going to actually lose 13,000. So our opportunity cost increases for each 100 guns that we gain. It starts off at we lose 1,000 butter, and then we lose 2,000 butter, and then we lose 4,000 butter. So it shows us increasing opportunity costs, and our curve will look different depending on whether we have consistent or constant opportunity costs or increasing opportunity costs. So what I want you to do right now is I want for you to pause me, and I want for you to graph this this chart here. When you're graphing, on this one, it's not going to make much of a difference, but I want for you to get in the habit. We graph a little different in economics. And so anything that is in your left-hand column will actually go on your y-axis, okay? So your vertical axis will be labeled up by 100s. We're only going to work in quadrant 1. You will label up from by 100s to 500. So label your vertical y-axis guns and label it by 100 increments upwards from 0 to 500. Your horizontal axis, your x-axis, will be labeled butter, and you will, I always go by twos. So you can count by 2, 4, 6, 8 thousands. If you have my sticky graphs and you want to label by 1,000s, you're not going to make it all the way to 25,000. So if you want to start at 13 and count out to 25,000, that would be okay too. So take this time right now to graph this. If you are struggling with what it should look like and how you should label your graph, go down here to this, and it's backwards. You see here, this is on the x-axis and this is on the y-axis. I can't find a graphing program that will graph the way economics graphs it. So you're going to want this part here on your y-axis, and you're going to want this part here on your x-axis. So take your time right now, pause me, and take a moment to graph that. All right, once you have graphed this, you should have guns on your y-axis and butter on your x-axis, and it is going to show us our increasing opportunity cost because your line is curved, okay? If it were a straight diagonal line with no curve in it, it would show us constant opportunity cost, but this curve is going to show us increasing opportunity cost. So your curve should look like this. Once you do this, you will see that inside the curve, if you are producing at 10,000 guns and 100 butters, you are inefficient. So if you put a dot inside of your graph here, I want for you to label that inefficient. Anything on your curve is the most efficient use of your resources, and anything outside the curve is impossible for you to create with the resources that you currently have. Now, this thing won't always stay the same, but right now it's curved, so label inefficient somewhere inside, efficient on your curve. Uh-oh, I did not mean to do that. Let's move that back up there. Efficient on your curve and impossible somewhere on your graph out here. Okay, so the production possibilities curve is not immovable. It can actually move inward or outward. And anytime you have new resources, you will be able to shift your production possibilities curve outward if you can produce more, or inward if you can produce less. So at some point here, you would be operating inefficiently because you could make both more guns and more butter. If you are operating on this line, you would be operating perfectly efficiently. Again, it doesn't tell you what you should produce, it tells you what you can produce. So it doesn't say you should produce here compared to here. It just says that you can produce efficiently at any point along this curve. Any point out here is impossible because this is the maximum amount that you can produce. But let's say that we have new resources that will allow us to spend more on military goods, but not domestic goods. So our guns were labeled. Let's see, I can't do this very well on a keypad. If this is our gun side, and this is, I'm just going to try to do a B for butter. And that's the butter side. If we can produce more guns but not more butter, our curve would only shift out in this direction. If we had where we could produce more of both, if we had new technology where we could increase both our guns and our butter, we could produce more goods for domestic consumption and more military goods, then we could shift this production possibilities curve outward in all directions, and it would look like this. And so what used to be impossible is now sitting right there as efficient, and now somewhere out here would be impossible, and somewhere that used to be impossible here would now be inefficient. So our production possibilities curve, or production possibilities frontier, whichever one we want to call it, is going to show us what happens when we use our resources to choose to produce one good or another good, or some combination of the two, and what happens when we increase our resources to be able to shift our production possibilities curve outward. This is important because what this extension of the production possibilities curve is actually showing us is economic growth. So when we find new resources, or we increase our technology, which is a part of capital, or our workers become more efficient because of human capital, then our economy can grow, which is pretty important. I hope that that was not overly difficult, but we will talk about any questions that you have in producing these. And when we meet on our Google Meet, we will work through you guys producing some of those, some production possibilities curve, and letting me look at them to make sure that we're able to graph them correctly and that we're all good. Hope you have a good day. Bye.